Basically, we looked at three important types of binding, which are interpolation, property binding, and event binding. This concept allows us to connect data between the component and the template itself. For example, we saw how interpolation can display data from the component in our HTML. We also saw how property binding can dynamically update your element properties. And then also lastly, we saw how an event binding allows the template to respond to user action, such as click and input. We also discussed about the advantages and disadvantages of each and every approach, and when it comes to when to use the most appropriate type of data binding. However, displaying data is not the only part that we usually need in an application. In a real-world application, we often need to control what appears in our UI. This can be based on a certain condition, or we might also want to display a list of data dynamically. For example, sometimes we might want to show an element only if the condition is true, or sometimes we want to display different content depending on the value. Or maybe sometimes we might want to loop through a list of items and render them in our template. To achieve this, Angular provides template control flow mechanisms. And in earlier versions of Angular, developers used structural directives such as the ngIf, the ngFor, and the ngSwitch. But in modern Angular, particularly starting from Angular 17 going up, a new and a more readable control flow syntax was introduced. This includes the @if for conditional rendering, the @switch for handling multiple conditions, the @for for looping through a collection of data, and also we'll look at index and looping state variables, such as index, $first, last, even, and odd. These new constructs makes Angular template more cleaner, easier to read, and close to normal programming logic, similar to what we see in TypeScript and in JavaScript. By the end of this lecture, you will be able to understand how to control the structure of your template dynamically. Okay, so let's start with conditional rendering, which is used when we want to show or hide elements based on a certain condition. To demonstrate this concept, we will build a dynamic user selector that updates UI based on the selected row. This type of pattern is commonly used in applications such as admin versus user dashboards, content management systems, CMS, e-commerce platforms, enterprise business tools, etc. And in this example, we will explore both traditional approach and the newer Angular flow features. Okay, so to achieve that, let's jump onto our component which we created. Remember, we created a component in our previous lesson. My component here, where we have got our template, which is just showing this text here. And then I also went on to add quite a number of styles. And then from there, we also have got our component, which is at this moment blank. It doesn't have anything. So to do so, we're going to come up with an array that will contain all our users and their rows. Best, it will be connecting to a database and grabbing data from a database, but since we don't have a database, we will use this array here. So let's jump onto it. Okay, so I'm going to declare an array. I'm going to call it users, which is equals. Then inside our array, I'm going to just add maybe a number of objects at 3. And then within these objects here, I'm just going to use some of the data which I already typed. John information, we have Mary's information, and then lastly, we have F information. I'm going to save our work. Great stuff. Now that we do have our array here, the next thing that we want to do is we want to declare a variable selected user, and then we initialize it with our first value. So we're going to say selected user is equals to this, meaning our array users, and then we initialize it with whatever we have at index 0. So what does this mean? This means that we have set our array, and then we have initialized it with the first value here, which is John. From here, we head on to our template where we are going to apply some HTML. All right, so here we're going to have 3 sections. Our first section will be where we will have our dropdown. And then the other section, we will have our user info. And then lastly, we will have the content section. Let's start with our dropdown. So with our dropdown, we will use a select. We'll use a select. And this select here will have 3 options. 3, then you 10. Right. So on the select part here, we want to use a two-way binding, which means that when the dropdown changes, the selected user will also be updated. Or when the selected user changes, our dropdown will also be updated. So to do so, we will then use ngModel, which we will say this is going to be equals to our selected user. So what does it mean? What does this mean? This means that when our dropdown is updated, this selected user here, which we have, let me save my work first. This selected user here, which we have in our component, will be updated, which means that this will be overridden with the new data. Or whatever we have here is updated, then this means that also our dropdown will be updated as well. Now for our options, since we are not yet using loops, we're going to manually type each and every item that we have in our array here. And we will do so by using ngValue, which allows us to bind the entire object or the entire value to each and every option that we have here in our dropdown. Okay, to do so, we will then get rid of this, and then we'll say we want to use ngValue such that we will ngValue such that it will be equals to whatever we have under the users array at index 0. Then we'll do the same. Just going to simply copy this and paste it here and paste it here. There we go. And then simply change this to index 1. And then we also change this to index 2. Save our work. Okay, so as for display, we will then go and use interpolation. I remember interpolation from our previous lesson. There we go. So in here, we'll then say users at index 0, and we only want the name. Going to copy this, then paste it in here, and then just change this to row. So it will display name and row, name and row. I'm going to copy this, okay, and paste it in here, and paste it in here as well, and then just change the indexing. Here we are now at index 1 and index 1. Then we are here, we are now at index 2, and then here index 2 as well. And then you save your work. Now from saving your work, you can see on our page here that we now have names from our array here. From our array here, these are the names that we have, and we are now able to show them here. Now here, let's now go on and display user info. For us to do so, I'm going to make use of a class. I'm going to call it user-info. And this class here will have 2 div tag in it. So I'm going to say div times 2, and then temp. There we go. The first one, I'm just simply going to say name. And then I will then go on and use interpolation again. From the variable selected user, I want name. Okay, I left out a dot here. I'm going to do the same here, copy and paste. Just change these to row and change this to row as well. Save your work. Now you can see we now have the section for our user here, which means that if I change this to editor, then it will display editor. If I change this to user, then it will display information for user. If I go back to admin, it will display information for our admin. Now let's apply our logic here using if statement. So we're going to say if you open your brackets, and you open your curly brackets, then let's just build this, and then we come here and then we say else, again at else if open your brackets and your curly brackets. Think we will only have, let's have our last one, at else open your curly brackets. There we go. There we go. So there's our structure. We just need to put some content in there. But you can see it's very, very clear, and it's readable, and it's manageable, and it's closer to what we have in JavaScript, in TypeScript, or any other programming language. Very readable. It's very, 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 very simple to follow. So in here, for our condition, we are going to say if selected user dot row is equals to admin, okay, is equals to admin. If it is equals to admin, come on. Here we go. Here we go. If it is equals to admin, then let us have a div class, and we were going to call it row select section, sorry. And this will have a heading inside h2 tab. There we go. We also want to add a p tag in here. There we go. So let's add our information here. So we will then go on and say this will be our admin dashboard. And then in here, we'll just simply say welcome admin. Then we'll do the same for, the same for next one, which is our editor. We'll say selected user dot row if it's equals to editor. Sorry, if it's equals to editor, then we will then have our editor heading here, and then in here we can then also do the same. Have a welcome message. I'm back. I think we left a message here. Welcome admin. There we go. Save our before we save our work, let's do the else part here. I think it's pretty simple. I'm just going to copy this and then paste it in the else tab here, and then we just change this, and we will say user, and then we'll say welcome user. That's all we need. I'm going to save our work, then you will see it will change on our page here. We'll have, there we go. So if I change to this, you can see the information is now changing. It's restricted to editor, it's restricted to user, it's restricted to admin. Now you can see the logic that we have, the if statement, the if else, if statement. It's more structural, it's more easy to read, easy to follow, as compared to what we used to have here before version 17 using ngIf. Let me just copy and paste this code here. See, using ngIf's role is equals to row is equals to admin and so forth. This was more, it was not tidy. It was difficult to follow for someone who's just starting Angular for the first time. But with this one here, if you're familiar with JavaScript, if you're familiar with TypeScript, it's easier and it's simple to follow. All right, so that's all from using our logic, using the if statement. The next that we want to look at is loop. So we will see how you can use the ngFor compared to ngFor, which was used before.